Adrienne Gray had always prided herself on being a good judge of character. 20 years of building her financial consultancy firm from the ground up had taught her to read people quickly and accurately. That skill had served her well in the boardroom, helping her close deals that her male counterparts couldn't. But standing in her kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, coffee mug clutched so tightly her knuckles had turned white, she wondered if she'd made the worst misjudgment of her life. The first ray of dawn filtered through her kitchen's east-facing windows, catching the auburn highlights in her hair as she stared vacantly at the family photo on her refrigerator. It was from their trip to Cape Cod 3 weeks ago. Her and Liam, smiling, carefree. His arm was draped casually around her shoulders, and she remembered feeling so certain then that she'd finally found someone real. "I'm such a fool," she whispered to herself, setting down the coffee mug with a controlled motion that betrayed the chaos inside her. For the third time that morning, she replayed what she'd seen the night before. Liam, emerging from Alexis's room just after midnight, quietly pulling the door closed behind him. The image was burned into her memory. His careful movements, the way he'd checked the hallway before stepping out, the guilty start when he'd spotted Adrienne standing there. 3 months. They'd only been living together for 3 months. It seemed impossible that things could unravel so quickly, but the evidence was mounting. Late nights, distracted conversations, the subtle withdrawal of affection, all the classic signs she'd managed to ignore until now. The light bulb needed changing, he'd said when she confronted him, holding up the evidence, an actual bulb in his hand. The explanation was plausible, yet something in his voice had sounded off. A slight tremor, perhaps, or the way his eyes had shifted briefly to the left. Adrienne checked her watch, a slim, elegant timepiece that had been a gift to herself when she'd signed her 100th client. 6:45. Alexis would be down soon to start breakfast, and Liam would follow shortly after. She needed to compose herself before facing them. The businesswoman in her, the strategist, wanted more information before taking action. Jumping to conclusions without adequate data was never her style. She moved to the large bay window overlooking her meticulously landscaped garden, remembering the evening 2 months ago when she and Liam had sat on the patio discussing their future. It had been a mild spring evening, the kind that makes Bostonians forgive the brutal winters. "I've never met anyone like you," he'd told her that night, his voice earnest in the gathering darkness. "Someone who sees me for who I am, not what I can give them." The memory made her chest ache now. Had it all been an act? She'd told him about her past relationships that night, how her previous partners had been drawn to her wealth and status rather than to her as a person. How the last one had actually tried to sue her for half her assets after just 6 months of dating. Liam had seemed different, genuine. He'd refused her offer of a position at her company, saying he wanted to succeed on his own merits. That integrity had captivated her. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted her thoughts. Adrienne straightened her posture and smoothed the front of her silk blouse. Years of business negotiations had taught her the value of a poker face. She turned just as Alexis entered the kitchen, her young face brightening at the sight of Adrienne. "Good morning, Ms. Gray. You're up early today," Alexis said, tying her apron around her slender waist. At 26, she possessed the fresh-faced beauty that Adrienne had once taken for granted in herself. There was an innocence about her that made Adrienne's suspicions feel almost sordid. "I have an early conference call with Tokyo," Adrienne replied evenly. "Thought I'd get a head start." As Alexis busied herself with breakfast preparations, Adrienne observed her closely. Was there guilt in those movements? Some sign of a woman sleeping with her employer's partner? But Alexis seemed completely at ease, humming softly as she cracked eggs into a bowl. "Would you like some fresh coffee? This pot looks like it's been sitting a while," Alexis offered. "That would be lovely, thank you." Adrienne's tone was neutral, professional, the same voice she used with difficult clients. She watched as Alexis prepared the coffee, noting the efficiency of her movements. Liam had recommended Alexis for the position when Adrian mentioned needing household help, explaining they'd worked together briefly at his previous job. At the time, it had seemed like a perfect solution, someone trustworthy who needed the income while finishing her business degree. Now, Adrian wondered if there had been more to the suggestion. "Will Mr. Westbrook be joining you for breakfast?" Alexis asked, the question innocent enough on the surface. "I believe so. He should be down shortly." Adrian took a deliberate sip of her coffee, studying Alexis over the rim. "You two seem to get along well." Something flickered across Alexis's face, too quick to interpret conclusively. "He's very kind," she replied, turning her attention back to the stove. "Everyone at the house misses him since he moved." "The house?" Adrian filed this information away, another piece to the puzzle. Liam had told her he'd been renting an apartment before moving in with her. What house was Alexis referring to? Before she could probe further, Liam appeared in the doorway, 6 feet of solid dependability in a white button-down shirt and navy slacks, his dark hair still damp from the shower. For a moment, looking at him, Adrian felt her doubts waver. How could this man, with his steady gaze and honest face, be deceiving her? "Morning, beautiful," he said, crossing the kitchen to kiss her cheek. If he sensed her stiffness, he didn't show it. "You're up early." "Tokyo call," she repeated, watching as his gaze briefly flicked to Alexis, who kept her eyes on the breakfast preparations. The exchange lasted less than a second, but Adrienne caught it. A silent communication, perhaps. As they sat down to breakfast, the conversation remained superficial. Work schedules, weather, plans for the weekend. Adrienne participated mechanically, her mind racing through possible scenarios and solutions. The methodical approach that had built her business empire was now focused on a far more personal problem. When Liam left for work, his goodbye kiss was warm but hurried. No different from any other day, really. Except that today, every action seemed laden with potential meaning. Adrian watched through the window as he backed his modest sedan out of the driveway. The car was another point in his favor. When they'd met, he'd shown no interest in upgrading to something flashier, despite her offers. "Will there be anything else, Ms. Gray?" Alexis asked, beginning to clear the breakfast dishes. "Actually, yes," Adrian decided on impulse. "I'm thinking of redecorating the guest bedroom. Would you mind if I took some measurements later today?" "Of course not," Alexis replied smoothly, "though I'll be at my afternoon classes from 1 until 4. "Perfect." 3 hours alone in the house would give Adrienne the opportunity she needed. She smiled, a businesswoman closing a deal. "That works beautifully. Thank you, Alexis." When the young woman had left the room, Adrienne pulled out her phone and made a call to her assistant, canceling her afternoon appointments. Then she opened her laptop and began researching surveillance cameras. If her instincts were wrong, she'd feel foolish, perhaps even ashamed. But if they were right? By noon, Adrienne had purchased everything she needed from an electronics store across town. The tiny camera was designed to look like a smoke detector, inconspicuous enough to escape notice. As she drove home, she felt a cold determination replace her earlier turmoil. Whatever was happening in her house, she would uncover it. Adrienne Gray had built an empire by addressing problems head-on, and she wouldn't start backing down now. At exactly 1:15, with Alexis safely gone to her classes, Adrienne entered the young woman's room. It was neat and impersonal, with few decorative touches beyond a framed photo on the nightstand. Adrienne picked it up, examining the image of a younger Alexis standing beside Liam and an older couple, presumably their parents. They were posed in front of a modest suburban home, all smiling. A family. Adrienne set the photo down carefully, a strange tightness in her chest. She installed the camera with methodical precision, positioning it for the best view of the entire room. When she finished, she stood back to survey her work. From tomorrow morning, she would have eyes in this room. The thought should have been comforting, but instead, it filled her with a profound sadness. How had she come to this? Spying in her own home. That night, As she lay beside Liam in their king-sized bed, Adrian listened to his steady breathing and wondered what secrets it might contain. In the darkness, she could almost convince herself that her suspicions were absurd, the product of past disappointments rather than present reality. But then she remembered his face as he'd exited Alexis's room, and her resolve hardened. "Is everything okay?" Liam's voice startled her. "You've been quiet tonight." Adrian turned to face him, wishing she could see his eyes clearly in the darkness. "Just tired," she said. "Work has been demanding lately." His hand found hers under the covers, warm and solid. "You push yourself too hard. Always have, from what you've told me." For a moment, the gesture nearly undid her. How could this touch, so genuine and comforting, belong to someone who might be betraying her? She squeezed his hand in response, unable to trust her voice. "Good night, Adrian," he murmured, already drifting back to sleep. "Good night," she whispered back, knowing that for her, sleep would remain elusive. Tomorrow, the camera would begin recording, and soon after, she would have her answers, for better or worse. In the quiet darkness of her bedroom, surrounded by the luxury her success had afforded her, Adrienne Gray felt utterly alone with her suspicions. She had spent a lifetime building walls to protect herself, only to find that the threat might have come from within. As she stared at the ceiling, waiting for dawn, one thought kept circling in her mind. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals come from those we least suspect. The morning light filtered through the blinds as Adrienne opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented. She'd finally fallen asleep around 3 in the morning, her mind exhausted from endless cycles of suspicion and doubt. Beside her, Liam's side of the bed was already empty, the sheets cool to the touch. She glanced at the clock, 7:15. He must have left early for work, or perhaps he hadn't. The thought slithered into her mind before she could stop it. She sat up abruptly, reaching for her phone on the nightstand. With a few quick taps, she accessed the surveillance app she'd installed the previous day. The feed from Alexis's room appeared on her screen, showing an empty, undisturbed bedroom. Adrienne wasn't sure if she felt relief or disappointment. Downstairs, she found Alexis preparing breakfast as usual, cheerful and seemingly untroubled. There was no sign of Liam. "Good morning, Ms. Gray," Alexis greeted her. "Mr. Westbrook left about 45 minutes ago. Said something about an early inventory at the store." Adrienne nodded, accepting the cup of coffee Alexis offered. "Thank you. I must have been sleeping deeply. I didn't hear him leave." "He was very quiet," Alexis replied, turning back to the stove. "Said he didn't want to wake you since you seemed so tired lately." How considerate, Adrienne thought, uncertain whether to interpret this as evidence of Liam's genuine care or his guilt manifesting as overcompensation. She sipped her coffee slowly, observing Alexis's movements for any telltale signs of deception, but the young woman seemed perfectly at ease, humming softly as she prepared a vegetable omelette. "Your classes went well yesterday?" Adrienne asked casually. "Yes, very well," Alexis smiled. "Professor Martinez praised my business model proposal, said it showed real-world understanding. That's excellent. Your degree is in business administration, correct?" "Yes, ma'am. I'll be the first in my family to graduate college." There was undeniable pride in her voice, and something else, a hint of determination that Adrienne recognized from her own early career days. "That's quite an achievement," Adrienne said sincerely. Despite her suspicions, she couldn't help but respect the young woman's ambition. After breakfast, Adrienne retreated to her home office, a sleek, modern space overlooking the garden. She had calls scheduled all morning, but her focus kept drifting to the surveillance app open in a minimized window on her computer. Every few minutes, she would check it, only to see Alexis going about her normal cleaning routine around the house. Nothing suspicious, nothing incriminating. By midday, Adrienne began to wonder if she'd overreacted. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation for what she'd seen. Perhaps the light bulb really had needed changing. But then, why the secrecy? Why the careful check of the hallway before exiting? Why the strange tension at breakfast yesterday? At 1 o'clock, Alexis knocked on her office door. "I'm heading to class now, Ms. Gray. I've prepared a salad for your lunch. It's in the refrigerator." "Thank you, Alexis. Have a good afternoon." Alone in the house, Adrienne tried to focus on work, but her thoughts kept circling back to Liam and Alexis. On impulse, she rose from her desk and walked to Liam's study, a small room he used primarily for paying bills and occasional work he brought home. Unlike the rest of the house, which reflected Adrienne's polished taste, this space had a distinctly masculine feel, with leather-bound books and a vintage desk lamp. She hesitated at the doorway, aware that what she was about to do crossed another boundary. Searching someone's personal space felt invasive, a violation of trust. But then, hadn't her trust already been violated? With renewed determination, she entered the room. The desk was organized, almost meticulously so. Liam had never struck her as particularly fastidious, which made the precision of the arrangement seem almost deliberate, as if he expected someone might look. She opened the top drawer cautiously, finding only office supplies and a few personal items: a pocket knife, a small tin of mints, a business card holder. The second drawer contained financial documents, bills, bank statements, pay stubs. Adrienne flipped through them quickly, noting that Liam's salary from the hardware store was modest but respectable. She knew he wasn't with her for money. He'd made that clear from the beginning, refusing her offers of financial assistance even when his car needed expensive repairs. In the bottom drawer, she found a stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band. They were addressed to a P.O. box in Liam's name, with no return address. Adrienne's heart quickened as she slipped one open, expecting to find evidence of a secret life, perhaps communications from another woman, or financial transactions he'd kept hidden. Instead, she found receipts. Dozens of them, meticulously organized by date, all from Western Union. Liam had been sending money somewhere, significant amounts considering his income. Each transfer was directed to someone named Patricia Westbrook in Cleveland, Ohio. Adrienne sat back in Liam's chair, frowning. Patricia Westbrook. The name seemed familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. Liam had mentioned growing up in Ohio, but he rarely spoke about his family beyond vague references to his parents and sister. He'd explained they weren't close, a common enough situation that Adrienne hadn't pressed for details. She carefully replaced the envelopes and closed the drawer, more confused than before. If Liam was sending money to family members, why keep it secret? And what did this have to do with Alexis? Her phone chimed with a calendar reminder. A video conference in 15 minutes. Adrienne reluctantly returned to her office, her discovery adding yet another layer to the mystery surrounding Liam Westbrook. The afternoon dragged on, each minute stretching as Adrienne mechanically responded to emails and conducted calls. At 4:30, she heard the front door open, followed by Alexis's light footsteps in the hallway. Adrienne quickly checked the surveillance feed, watching as Alexis entered her room, set down her backpack, and began changing out of her school clothes. There was nothing suspicious in the young woman's actions, no secretive phone calls or hidden gestures. Just a student returning from class, preparing to resume her household duties. Adrienne felt a twinge of shame for watching these private moments, but she pushed the feeling aside. She needed answers. At 6 o'clock, Liam called to say he'd be late. The hardware store had received a large shipment that needed to be inventoried immediately. "Don't wait up for dinner," he told her, his voice tinny over the phone's speaker. "I might grab something with the guys afterward." "The guys?" Adrienne questioned, her tone carefully neutral. "Yeah, Mike and Dave from receiving," Liam responded easily. "Nothing fancy. Probably just burgers at Murphy's." The explanation sounded plausible enough, but Adrienne's newfound suspicion colored everything. "Enjoy," she said simply. "I'll see you when you get home." After hanging up, she sat motionless at her desk, weighing her options. She could drive by the hardware store to verify his story, but that felt too much like something from a bad television drama. Besides, what would it prove? If he was there, she'd feel foolish. If he wasn't, she'd still need to discover where he actually was. Instead, she decided to use the evening to explore more directly. She found Alexis in the kitchen, preparing a single serving of baked salmon. "Mr. Westbrook called to say he'll be working late," Adrienne explained, leaning against the counter. "It'll just be me for dinner?" "I heard," Alexis nodded. "Would you like me to set the dining room? Or would you prefer to eat in the sitting room tonight?" "Actually, I thought we might eat together," Adrienne suggested, watching closely for Alexis's reaction. "There's no reason for you to prepare a separate meal for yourself later." Surprise flickered across the young woman's face, quickly replaced by a smile. "That's very kind of you, Ms. Gray. I'd be happy to join you." They ate in the breakfast nook, an intimate space off the kitchen that Adrienne rarely used. The conversation began awkwardly. Employer and employee suddenly thrust into a social setting without the buffer of Liam's presence. But gradually, as the meal progressed, Adrienne steered the discussion toward more personal topics. "How are you finding Boston? It must be quite different from Ohio." Alexis looked up sharply. "You know I'm from Ohio." "Liam mentioned it," Adrienne replied smoothly, noting the reaction. "He said you both grew up there." "Right, of course," Alexis recovered quickly. "It's very different, more fast-paced, but I like it. There's so much opportunity here. And your family? Do they miss you?" A shadow crossed Alexis's face. Yes, I'm sure they do. But they understand this is a great opportunity for me." Adrienne pressed gently. "It must be difficult, being so far from home." "Do you visit often?" "Not as often as I'd like," Alexis admitted, pushing her food around her plate. "Plane tickets are expensive, and between work and school, there's not much time." "I understand completely. Building a career requires sacrifice." Adrienne paused, then added casually, "I'm curious, how did you and Liam come to work together before?" Alexis's fork halted midway to her mouth. For a split second, something that looked like panic flashed in her eyes. "Oh, it was just a small shop in our hometown. Nothing special. I was just helping out during summer breaks." The answer was vague. Deliberately so, Adrienne suspected. She decided to push further. "It's fortunate that your schedules aligned to bring you both to Boston at the same time." Alexis set down her fork, her appetite apparently gone. "Yes, very fortunate," she agreed, her voice tight. "Ms. Gray, may I ask why you're so interested in my background suddenly?" The direct question caught Adrienne off guard. She'd spent decades in business negotiations, but somehow this young woman had managed to flip the conversation. She recovered quickly, years of boardroom experience coming to her aid. "I realize we've lived under the same roof for weeks, yet I know very little about you," she said smoothly. "It seems an oversight on my part." Alexis nodded slowly, but the wariness didn't leave her eyes. "I appreciate your interest," she said carefully, "but there's really not much to tell. I'm just a small-town girl trying to get an education and make something of myself." The phrase struck Adrienne as oddly familiar, something Liam had said about himself when they first met. Just a small-town guy trying to make good. The parallel seemed too precise to be coincidental. After dinner, Alexis insisted on clearing the dishes despite Adrienne's offer to help. The conversation had become stilted, the earlier openness replaced by caution on both sides. Adrienne retreated to the sitting room with a glass of wine, replaying the interaction in her mind. Alexis was hiding something. That much was clear. But what? The house grew quiet as evening deepened into night. Adrienne checked the surveillance feed periodically, but Alexis remained in her room, apparently studying at her desk. At 11:30, Adrienne heard the front door open and close softly. Liam was home. She remained in the sitting room, listening as he moved through the house, his footsteps pausing briefly outside Alexis's door before continuing to the master bedroom. The hesitation, slight as it was, sent a chill through Adrienne. When she entered their bedroom 20 minutes later, Liam was already in bed, his breathing slow and regular. Either he'd fallen asleep remarkably quickly, or he was pretending. Adrian slipped under the covers beside him, maintaining a careful distance between their bodies. "You're home late," she said quietly, knowing he was awake despite his performance. There was a moment's hesitation before he rolled over to face her. "Yeah, the inventory took longer than expected. Then the guys wanted to grab food." His voice was convincingly tired, but there was something guarded in his expression. "Sounds exhausting," she commented. "How was Murphy's?" "Crowded," he replied, the answer coming too quickly. "Thursday night football was on." Adrian nodded, noting that he hadn't actually confirmed they'd gone to Murphy's, just described a generic bar scene that could have been anywhere. She decided to take a risk. "I had an interesting dinner with Alexis tonight." Liam's body tensed subtly beneath the sheets. "Oh? That's nice. What did you talk about?" "Ohio, mostly. Your hometown. The shop where you two worked together." In the dim light, she saw his expression shift, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. "He told you about that, huh?" "Not in detail," Adrian replied, watching him carefully. She seemed reluctant to discuss it, actually. Liam yawned, a convenient way to break eye contact. "It was just a small hardware store, nothing like the place I manage now. Alexis helped out during summers in high school." The explanation matched Alexis's, but something in his delivery felt rehearsed, as if they'd agreed on this story beforehand. Adrian decided to push harder. "I also found something interesting today," she said, keeping her tone conversational. "Receipts for money transfers to Patricia Westbrook. Care to explain?" This time, the reaction was unmistakable. Liam sat up abruptly, fully awake now, his face a mask of shock and something else. "Fear? Guilt? You went through my desk?" His voice was low, controlled, but with an undercurrent of anger. "Yes," Adrian admitted, sitting up as well. "After I saw you coming out of Alexis's room the other night, I felt I had reason to be concerned." They stared at each other in the darkness, the trust between them suddenly as fragile as spun glass. Finally, Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of defeat. "It's not what you think, Adrian." "Then what is it?" she pressed. "Because right now, I'm thinking a lot of things, none of them good." Liam opened his mouth as if to explain, then closed it again. After a long moment, he said simply, "I can't talk about this now. It's complicated, and I'm exhausted. Can we discuss it tomorrow?" The evasion only heightened Adrian's suspicion, but she recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. Pushing further tonight would only result in a fight, not answers. "Fine," she agreed coldly. "Tomorrow." She turned away from him, pulling the covers tightly around her shoulders. Behind her, she felt Liam lie back down, the mattress shifting under his weight. The space between them felt vast, unbridgeable. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, Adrian's last thought was of the camera hidden in Alexis's room. Whatever was happening in her home, whatever secrets Liam and Alexis were keeping, she would have evidence soon enough. The truth, however painful, would be revealed. The only question was whether her heart could withstand the revelation. Adrian woke before dawn, the bedroom still cloaked in darkness. Beside her, Liam slept soundly, his breathing deep and regular. She studied his face in the dim light, filtering through the curtains, the strong jawline, the slight furrow between his brows, even in sleep. He looked troubled, she thought, a man carrying burdens he wouldn't share. Silently, she slipped from the bed and retrieved her phone from the nightstand. In the hallway, she paused to listen for any movement in the house before making her way to her office. Once inside, she closed the door gently behind her and accessed the surveillance app. The footage from overnight showed nothing unusual until 3:27 a.m. At that time, Liam had indeed entered Alexis's room. Adrienne's heart constricted as she watched him approach the sleeping young woman and gently shake her shoulder. Alexis woke immediately, sitting up in bed with an expression that showed no surprise at his presence, only concern. They spoke in hushed tones, too quiet for the camera's microphone to pick up clearly. Adrian increased the volume to maximum, straining to hear their conversation. The words were fragmented, but she caught phrases. "Can't keep doing this," from Alexis, and Liam's response, "No choice. They're counting on us." The exchange lasted only a few minutes before Liam departed, leaving Alexis sitting upright in bed, her expression troubled in the dim light. Not the face of a woman engaged in a romantic tryst, Adrian noted, but something equally intense. A shared anxiety, perhaps. She closed the app, her suspicions both confirmed and complicated. Something was happening between Liam and Alexis, but it didn't appear to be the affair she'd initially feared. The secretive meetings, the money transfers, the careful coordination of their stories, all pointed to something more complex than a simple betrayal. When she returned to the bedroom, Liam was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. He looked up as she entered, his expression haunted. "We need to talk," he said simply. "Yes, we do." Adrian remained standing, arms crossed defensively across her chest. "I saw the footage from last night, Liam. You visiting Alexis at 3 in the morning." His face paled. "You have cameras in her room?" "I installed one after seeing you leave her bedroom the other night." "What's going on, Liam? And don't tell me it's nothing, or that you're changing light bulbs at 3 a.m. He stood, moving to the window to gaze out at the still dark garden. When he finally spoke, his voice was resigned. "I need to make a phone call first. Then I'll explain everything." "A phone call? Now?" Adrian's patience was wearing thin. "To whom, exactly?" "To Alexis," he replied, turning to face her. "She should be part of this conversation." Adrian felt a surge of anger. "So you two can get your stories straight?" "No," Liam said firmly. "So we can finally tell you the truth. All of it." 10 minutes later, the three of them sat in Adrian's home office. Alexis perched nervously on the edge of a chair, still in her pajamas, with a robe hastily thrown over them. Liam stood by the window, his posture tense. Adrian sat behind her desk, the position giving her a sense of control she desperately needed. "I'm listening," she said coldly. Liam and Alexis exchanged a look, a silent communication that only heightened Adrian's unease. Finally, Liam took a deep breath. "Alexis isn't just someone I used to work with," he began. "She's my sister." The statement hung in the air, simple yet profound in its implications. Adrian stared at them, looking for the family resemblance she'd somehow missed. It was there, subtle but unmistakable in the shape of their eyes, the angle of their jawlines. "Your sister," she repeated slowly. "You told me your sister was still in Ohio." "I lied," Liam admitted, his voice strained. "About that and other things? Not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I was afraid of how it would look." "How what would look?" Adrian demanded, her gaze shifting between them. "That you brought your sister to work in my house without telling me? That you've been having secret meetings and sending money to someone named Patricia Westbrook, who I assume is your mother?" Alexis nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Yes, Patricia is our mom, and I'm so sorry for the deception, Ms. Gray. It was never meant to hurt you." Adrian leaned back in her chair, the pieces beginning to fit together, yet still forming an incomplete picture. "Explain. From the beginning." Liam moved to stand beside his sister, a protective gesture that struck Adrian as both touching and frustrating. Always the guardian, even now. "Our family had a small hardware business in Cleveland," he began. "Nothing fancy, but it supported us comfortably for years. Then the big box stores moved in, and we started struggling. Dad took out loans to keep things afloat, but it wasn't enough. Last year, he suffered a heart attack from the stress. The medical bills were enormous," Alexis continued, her voice small. "Even with insurance, and with the business failing, there was no way to pay them. Mom had to quit her teaching job to care for Dad. They were about to lose everything. The house, the store, everything." Liam ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Adrian now recognized as a sign of his distress. I moved to Boston 6 months ago for the management position at Hartman's Hardware. The salary was better than anything I could find in Cleveland. Every month, I send half my paycheck home to help with the bills. But it wasn't enough, Alexis added. Not with Dad's ongoing care and the business debts. So when Liam met you and things got serious, and you mentioned needing household help, he trailed off, looking ashamed. You saw an opportunity. Adrian finished for her, understanding dawning. A way to earn additional income to send home. Liam nodded, his expression miserable. I recommended Alexis for the position. She had just been accepted to the business program at Boston University, and this arrangement allowed her to earn money for tuition while still attending classes. The live-in situation meant she didn't need to pay rent, so almost everything she earns goes back to our parents. Adrian processed this information, her analytical mind separating facts from emotions. That explains the job and the money transfers. But why the secrecy? Why not simply tell me the truth from the beginning? Liam and Alexis exchanged another glance, and this time it was Alexis who answered. That was my fault. When Liam told me about you, about how successful you were, I pushed him to keep our relationship quiet. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Adrian pressed. Afraid you would think he was with you for your money, Alexis admitted, her gaze dropping to her hands. That if you knew about our family's financial troubles, and then his sister suddenly became your maid, it would seem calculated, like we were trying to take advantage of you. The word struck Adrian with particular force, echoing her own initial fears when she discovered Liam in Alexis's room. She'd immediately suspected him of the very thing they'd been trying to avoid. And the late-night meetings? She asked, her voice softer now. Alexis has been handling the finances for our parents, Liam explained, coordinating bill payments, negotiating with creditors. Sometimes issues come up that need immediate attention, and with our schedules, late night was the only time we could talk privately. Like last night, Adrian recalled. What was so urgent at 3 a.m? Alexis looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but direct. The hospital called yesterday evening. Dad's condition has worsened. They're recommending a specialized procedure that insurance won't fully cover. $20,000 out of pocket minimum. I was trying to figure out how to tell Liam when he came to check on me last night. I've been working a second job, Liam added quietly. Night shifts at Murphy's Bar 4 evenings a week. That's where I really was last night. Not inventory at the store. But even with that extra income, this new medical expense is beyond what we can manage. The revelation landed heavily in the room. Adrienne thought of the receipts she'd found, the modest sums that represented such a significant portion of Liam's income. She thought of her own wealth, the ease with which she could write a check for $20,000 without even noticing its absence from her accounts. "Why didn't you ask for my help?" she asked finally. The question directed primarily at Liam. He met her gaze directly, his expression a mixture of pride and regret. "I heard how you talked about your previous relationships, how those men had used you for your money. The night we discussed moving in together, you told me about your ex who tried to claim half your assets after just 6 months. You said you'd never again be someone's meal ticket. So you decided to struggle in silence instead," Adrienne concluded, "working yourself to exhaustion with 2 jobs, sending every spare dollar home." "I wanted to prove I was different," Liam said quietly, "that I loved you for you, not what you could give me." Asking for financial help, especially so early in our relationship, felt like proving your worst fears right. The office fell silent as Adrienne absorbed everything she'd heard. The deception hurt, certainly, but underneath it lay a motivation she could understand. Misguided though it might have been. Liam had kept his family's troubles secret, not to betray her, but in a twisted way, to protect their relationship from the very suspicions she'd eventually developed anyway. "The night you saw Liam leaving my room," Alexis volunteered hesitantly, "I'd received an email from Mom about Dad's worsening condition. Liam came to discuss our options. He really did change my light bulb too. It had burned out earlier that evening. A small, hysterical laugh escaped Adrienne. After all her suspicions, the light bulb excuse had actually been true. And the "I love you" I heard through the surveillance last night? Both siblings looked surprised at this revelation. "You have audio too?" Liam asked, dismayed. "I installed microphones after seeing the camera footage," Adrienne admitted, not particularly proud of the escalation, but unwilling to apologize for it. "I heard you say, 'I love you' to each other before leaving." Alexis blushed. "We always say that when we part. It's a family habit, I guess. After Dad's heart attack, we became more aware of how important it is to express feelings while you can." The explanation was simple, touching, and entirely believable. Adrienne felt the last of her suspicions beginning to crumble, replaced by a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that Liam wasn't betraying her romantically, hurt that he hadn't trusted her with the truth, and embarrassment over her elaborate surveillance operation. "I understand why you kept this from me," she said finally. "But relationships require trust, Liam. How can we build a future together if you're hiding something this significant?" "I know," he acknowledged, his voice heavy with regret. "I told myself it was temporary, that once we'd been together longer, once you were sure of my feelings, I could explain everything. But the longer I waited, the harder it became to find the right moment." Adrienne turned to Alexis. "And you? I employed you in my home, trusted you with my personal space and belongings, while you maintained this deception." Alexis nodded miserably. "I'm truly sorry, Ms. Gray. I've never been comfortable with the lie, but I felt trapped by our circumstances. My parents have sacrificed so much for my education, and with Dad's health declining—" She trailed off, tears spilling onto her cheeks. Adrienne rose from her desk and walked to the window, gazing out at the garden now illuminated by the rising sun. The early morning light cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, reminding her of the stark contrasts in her own life, the privilege she enjoyed compared to the struggles Liam's family faced. When she turned back to face them, her decision was made. "No more secrets," she said firmly. "No more late-night meetings or hidden financial transfers. If we're going to move forward, everything must be transparent." Liam nodded, relief visibly washing over him. "Absolutely. No more secrets. As for your father's medical procedure," Adrienne continued, "I'll cover the costs." She raised a hand as Liam began to protest. "Not as charity, Liam. As an investment in our future together. Your family is important to you, which means they're important to me too. I can't ask you to do that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're not asking. I'm offering." Adrienne's tone softened. "Would you rather work yourself to exhaustion at 2 jobs while your father's condition deteriorates? Pride is a luxury you can't afford right now, Liam." He looked stricken, torn between necessity and his deep-seated desire to stand on his own. Alexis reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "She's right, Liam," she said quietly. "Dad needs the procedure soon. We can't wait months to save up." After a long moment, Liam nodded, the gesture both an acceptance and a surrender. "Thank you," he said simply, the words inadequate for the magnitude of the offer. Adrienne crossed to stand before him, taking his hands in hers. "This is what partnership means, Liam. Facing challenges together, not hiding them from each other. I need to know you understand that." "I do," he promised, his eyes meeting hers with renewed honesty. "No more secrets. No more trying to handle everything alone." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the office in golden light, Adrienne felt a cautious hope replacing the suspicion and hurt that had dominated her thoughts for days. The path forward wouldn't be simple. Trust, once damaged, required time and effort to rebuild. But the foundation remained solid. Beneath the deception had been not betrayal, but misguided protection born of love. Love for his family, and love for her. In the quiet morning hours, as Boston stirred to life outside her window, Adrienne Gray made another decision, perhaps the most important one. Rather than allowing this crisis to drive them apart, she would use it as an opportunity to forge a stronger, more authentic connection. The walls that had protected her heart for so long had prevented pain. Yes, but they had also limited genuine intimacy. Perhaps it was time to lower those defenses, to risk vulnerability for the possibility of something deeper than she'd ever known. "We'll get through this," she told Liam, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "Together." The word felt foreign on her tongue, yet right somehow. A promise and a challenge, all at once. 2 weeks had passed since the morning of revelations in Adrienne's office, and the household had settled into a new rhythm, one of cautious honesty and gradual healing. The hidden camera had been removed from Alexis's room, the surveillance app deleted from Adrienne's phone. Small acts of trust, rebuilding what had been damaged. It was Sunday morning, and Adrienne sat at the kitchen island, reviewing the financial arrangements she'd made for Liam's father's procedure. The surgery was scheduled for Tuesday in Cleveland, with one of the top cardiac specialists in Ohio. She'd not only covered the $20,000 gap, but had also arranged for upgraded accommodations and follow-up care. Money couldn't solve everything, but in this case, it could provide the best possible medical treatment. "Coffee?" Liam appeared beside her, 2 steaming mugs in hand. He'd taken to waking early with her on weekends, another small adjustment that spoke volumes. "Thank you." She accepted the cup gratefully, noting how he'd prepared it exactly as she preferred. Just a splash of cream, no sugar. The small, attentive gesture touched her. "The flight to Cleveland is at 2 tomorrow afternoon," he said, sliding onto the stool beside her. "Alexis has already arranged for her professors to email her assignments while we're gone." "We?" Adrienne repeated, testing the word. "You're sure you want me to come with you? Meeting your parents for the first time while your father is undergoing surgery isn't exactly ideal circumstances." Liam covered her hand with his, warm and reassuring. "I want you there," he said simply. "You're part of my life now. All of it. Not just the parts I thought were presentable enough to share." His honesty, still raw and awkward at times, was something Adrienne had come to cherish these past weeks. The carefully constructed facade he'd maintained had crumbled, revealing the man beneath, more flawed than she'd initially believed, but also more resilient, more deeply feeling. "Besides," he added with a hint of his old humor, "if they're going to meet the woman who's saving Dad's life, it might as well be in person." "I'm not saving his life, Liam," Adrienne corrected gently. "The doctors are doing that. I'm just ensuring he gets the best care possible." "Semantics," he countered, leaning to kiss her temple. "To my parents, you might as well be wearing a cape and flying around the hospital." The image made her smile despite herself. "Well, I draw the line at spandex, just so we're clear." His laugh, genuine and warm, eased some of the tension that had been her constant companion since discovering him outside Alexis's room. These moments of normalcy felt precious, hard-won. Alexis entered the kitchen, already dressed for the day in jeans and a simple sweater, a far cry from the uniform she'd worn as Adrienne's employee. That had been one of the first changes they'd made. While Alexis still helped around the house, she did so now as family, not staff. Adrienne had insisted on continuing to pay her, but explicitly as support for her education, rather than compensation for household duties. "Good morning," Alexis greeted them, helping herself to coffee. The awkwardness that had initially characterized their interactions had gradually faded, though a certain carefulness remained. "I just finished packing. Mom called last night. She's nervous about the procedure, but trying not to show it. Dad's pretending it's just routine maintenance, like changing the oil in his truck." Liam smiled fondly. "That sounds like him. Stubborn to the end. Wonder where you got that particular trait," Adrienne remarked dryly, earning a playful nudge from Liam. As they discussed the logistics of the trip, Adrienne found herself studying the siblings, seeing now the familial connection she'd somehow missed before. It wasn't just their physical resemblance, the shared expressions, the similar gestures when emphasizing a point. It was the underlying bond, the way they instinctively understood each other's thoughts with just a glance, the kind of connection that came from a lifetime of shared experiences, both good and difficult. "I should get going," Alexis said, glancing at her watch. "Study group at the library. Last chance to prepare before we leave tomorrow." After she'd gone, Adrian and Liam moved to the patio with fresh coffee. The October morning was crisp, but not yet cold. The garden ablaze with autumn colors. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the occasional leaf drift down from the maple tree that dominated the back corner. "Penny called yesterday," Adrian said eventually. "The Richmond deal is finally moving forward." "That's the shopping center development, right?" Liam asked, demonstrating his attentiveness to her work despite his own preoccupations. "The one where the investors were dragging their feet?" "That's the one." She felt a surge of appreciation for his interest, the way he kept track of the projects that mattered to her. "It's a $30 million deal. If all goes well, it will be the largest our firm has ever handled." "That's amazing, Adrienne." His pride in her accomplishment was genuine, untainted by the envy or competitiveness she'd experienced with previous partners. "You've built something incredible." "It wasn't always this way," she admitted, memories surfacing from the early days of her career. "When I started, I was the only woman in a boardroom full of men who expected me to bring them coffee rather than investment strategies. My first year, a client asked if I was someone's secretary taking notes at a meeting I was actually leading." Liam's expression darkened. "What did you do?" I corrected him politely, then proceeded to outline a financial strategy that saved his company $2 million that quarter. She smiled at the memory. "He became one of my most loyal clients after that." "That doesn't surprise me at all," Liam said, his admiration evident. "You're formidable when you set your mind to something, including installing surveillance equipment," she acknowledged ruefully. "I'm still not proud of that, you know." "You had reason to be suspicious," he countered. "I was behaving strangely, disappearing at odd hours, having secret conversations with the young woman living in our house. In your position, I might have done the same." His forgiveness, freely given, eased some of the lingering guilt she carried about the invasion of privacy. Still, the memory of those days of suspicion served as a reminder of how easily trust could be damaged, and how painfully difficult it was to rebuild. "What changed your mind?" Liam asked suddenly. "About me, I mean. Even with the camera footage, you could have concluded the worst. Why didn't you?" Adrienne considered the question carefully. "It was the way you spoke to Alexis," she said finally. "Even without hearing all the words clearly, I could see the care between you. Not romance, something deeper. There was a protectiveness in your posture, a familiarity that spoke of years, not months. And when I heard you say, 'I love you' to each other, it didn't sound like lovers. It sounded like family." Liam nodded, understanding. "We've always been close, even as kids. When our parents worked late at the store, I was the one making sure Alexis did her homework, got dinner, went to bed on time. She used to joke that I was more of a parent than a brother sometimes." "That explains a lot about you," Adrian observed. "The responsibility you carry, the way you try to solve everyone's problems yourself. Not the healthiest approach, as we've discovered," he acknowledged, with a self-deprecating smile. "My therapist would have a field day with that particular pattern." The casual mention of therapy, something he'd begun the week after their confrontation, was another sign of how much had changed between them. The willingness to be vulnerable, to acknowledge his struggles openly, rather than hiding them behind a facade of capability. "Have you thought more about what you'll do after your father recovers?" Adrienne asked, shifting the conversation toward practical matters. "About the family business?" Liam sighed, his expression growing somber. "The hardware store can't be saved, not in its current form. The big box competitors have too much of a foothold now. But I've been talking with Dad about repurposing the space, maybe turning it into a specialized workshop, offering custom carpentry and restoration services, something that differentiates us from the mass-market retailers." "That sounds promising," Adrienne said, her business mind automatically analyzing the concept. Boutique services are growing in demand as people seek authenticity and craftsmanship over mass production. That's what I was thinking too, Liam agreed. Dad has incredible woodworking skills that he rarely got to showcase in the hardware business. This would play to his strengths while creating a sustainable business model. Would you want to be involved? She asked, the question that had been hovering between them for days. Liam was silent for a moment, contemplating the fallen leaves swirling across the patio. Part of me feels I should move back to help them rebuild, he admitted. But another part, he turned to face her, his expression serious. Another part wants to build a life here, with you. The honesty of his statement touched her deeply. And if those two desires could be reconciled, she suggested, the family business could benefit from your management experience. But that doesn't necessarily require your physical presence every day. There are consultative roles, remote support. You've been thinking about this, he realized, studying her face. I have, she acknowledged. Your family is important to you, Liam. I don't want to be the reason you're torn between obligations. He reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers. Have I told you lately how extraordinary you are? Not in the last 24 hours, she teased, deflecting the compliment even as it warmed her. They spent the remainder of the morning discussing possibilities, brainstorming ways to support the Westbrook family business while maintaining their life in Boston. For Adrienne, who had spent decades making unilateral decisions, the collaborative process felt both foreign and exhilarating. A true partnership where her expertise was valued but not dominant. By early afternoon, clouds had gathered, bringing the threat of autumn rain. They moved inside, where Liam began preparations for dinner, a skill he'd revealed only recently. Another aspect of himself he'd kept hidden in his effort to appear uncomplicated and self-sufficient. Adrienne watched from the counter as he moved efficiently around the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a stew that would simmer for hours. There was something deeply intimate about seeing this domestic side of him, more revealing, in some ways, than any physical intimacy they'd shared. What? He asked, catching her stare. Just thinking, she replied, about how many layers there are to you. The hard-working store manager, the self-sacrificing son and brother, the secret gourmet cook. He smiled, a touch of color rising to his cheeks. Not so much gourmet as practical. When you're responsible for feeding a hungry teenager on a budget, you learn a few tricks. Another skill developed taking care of Alexis, Adrienne noted. You really did raise her in many ways, didn't you? Liam's knife paused over the cutting board, his expression growing distant. Our parents worked 16-hour days to keep the store running. Someone had to make sure Alexis had clean clothes for school, help with her science projects, show up for her band concerts. It wasn't that our parents didn't care. They were working themselves to exhaustion to give us opportunities. But time was the one thing they couldn't provide. The revelation illuminated so much about Liam's character, his fierce protectiveness, his tendency to shoulder burdens alone, his drive to solve problems rather than simply acknowledge them. Traits that had led to their recent crisis, yes, but also qualities that made him the man she'd fallen in love with. And now, you're continuing that pattern, she observed gently, working 2 jobs, sending money home, sacrificing your own needs for theirs. It's what family does, he said simply, resuming his chopping. Yes, Adrienne agreed, but family also accepts help when it's needed. Family shares burdens rather than carrying them alone. He looked up, meeting her gaze. Is that your way of saying you consider yourself part of this family now? The question caught her off guard, more direct than she'd expected. Yet, as she considered it, Adrienne realized that somewhere in the chaos of the past weeks, amid the hurt and healing, something fundamental had shifted. The careful boundaries she'd maintained in previous relationships had been crossed, not violated, but transcended through mutual vulnerability. I think, she said carefully, that I'm beginning to understand what family could mean. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was an honest one. After decades of independence, of defining herself primarily through professional achievement, the concept of belonging to something larger than herself, a family unit with its messy interconnections and shared responsibilities, remained both appealing and terrifying. Liam seemed to understand the complexity behind her response. He set down his knife and crossed to where she sat, taking her hands in his. Family isn't just blood, Adrienne. It's choice. It's showing up for each other, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Like flying to Cleveland to meet your parents while your father undergoes heart surgery? She asked, with a small smile. Exactly like that, he confirmed, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. Though I should warn you, my mother will probably try to feed you enough food for 3 people and ask highly inappropriate questions about our future together. I think I can handle that, Adrienne replied, the prospect of meeting the Westbrook family suddenly less daunting than it had seemed that morning. As long as you're by my side. Always, he promised, the word simple yet profound in its commitment. As the afternoon deepened into evening, they continued preparations for the trip, packing, arranging for the house to be looked after, tying up loose ends at their respective workplaces. The mundane tasks took on a weightier significance with the knowledge of what awaited them in Cleveland. Not just a medical procedure, but a joining of lives that until recently had been carefully separated. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Adrienne found herself contemplating how dramatically her life had changed in the span of just a few weeks. From suspecting betrayal to planning a future that included not just Liam, but his entire family. Parents she'd never met, a sister who had worked in her home under false pretenses, a family business in need of reinvention. "What are you thinking about?" Liam murmured, his voice drowsy in the darkness. "How quickly everything can change," she answered honestly. 2 weeks ago, I was hiding surveillance equipment in Alexis's room, convinced you were having an affair." He shifted closer, his arm tightening around her waist. And now I'm flying to Cleveland to meet your parents and help save your father's life," she said, the absurdity of it striking her anew. "Life really doesn't follow predictable patterns, does it?" "Not in my experience," he agreed, his breath warm against her neck. "Though I have to say, I prefer this plot twist to the one where I'm the unfaithful villain." Adrienne laughed softly, the sound dispelling the last of the tension she'd been carrying. "Me too," she admitted. "Definitely me too." As sleep claimed them, Adrienne's final thought was not of surveillance footage or secret meetings, but of family, the one she'd never had, and the one she might be building now, unexpected, and imperfect, and real. In all her careful planning, in all her strategic business decisions, she'd never anticipated this particular development. Yet somehow, it felt right. A new chapter beginning not with suspicion, but with truth. The Cleveland Clinic stood imposing against the pale November sky, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the century-old buildings surrounding it. Adrienne stood by the waiting room window, watching as occasional snowflakes drifted past, the season's first snow, delicate and hesitant. Behind her, Liam paced the length of the room, checking his watch every few minutes despite the large wall clock clearly visible above the reception desk. "The doctor said 2 hours, Alexis reminded him gently, looking up from her textbook. Even now, with her father in surgery, she had managed to maintain her focus on schoolwork, a discipline born of necessity rather than indifference. "It's only been an hour and 40 minutes. "I know," Liam acknowledged, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I just keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong." Adrienne moved from the window to stand beside him, placing a steadying hand on his arm. "Dr. Levin is one of the best cardiothoracic surgeons in the country," she reminded him. "Your father couldn't be in better hands." The words seemed to reach him, and he exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "You're right. I know you're right." He covered her hand with his own. a gesture of gratitude that communicated more than words could convey. In the corner of the waiting room, Patricia Westbrook sat, straight-backed and still, her weathered hands clutching a rosary. She hadn't spoken much since they'd arrived the previous evening, her emotions seemingly too profound for casual conversation, but she had embraced Adrian with surprising warmth, whispering a simple "thank you" that held more meaning than an elaborate speech. Meeting the Westbrooks had been revealing in ways Adrian hadn't anticipated. She'd seen immediately where Liam got his strong work ethic and sense of responsibility. Mason Westbrook, despite being weakened by heart disease, had insisted on discussing the business plans they'd been developing. Patricia had produced a home-cooked meal within an hour of their arrival. Despite the stress of her husband's impending surgery, they were proud people, resilient in the face of hardship, uncomfortable with accepting help, but deeply grateful for it nonetheless. The family resemblance extended beyond physical features. There was a fundamental decency about them all, an integrity that couldn't be taught or bought. It reminded Adrienne of something her grandmother had once told her. Character is what you do when no one is watching. The Westbrooks, she realized, had character in abundance. Family of Mason Westbrook? A surgical resident appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. They gathered around her anxiously. Liam, Alexis, Patricia, and Adrian slightly apart, aware of her technical status as an outsider despite the pivotal role she'd played in making the surgery possible. The procedure went very well, the resident announced, her tired face breaking into a smile. Dr. Levin was able to complete the repair with no complications. Mr. Westbrook is being moved to recovery now. He's stable, and his vitals are strong. The collective release of tension was almost palpable. Patricia closed her eyes briefly, lips moving in silent prayer. Alexis began to cry, quiet tears of relief streaming down her face. And Liam, stoic, responsible Liam, who had carried his family's burdens for so long, simply stood there, momentarily speechless with emotion. "When can we see him?" Patricia asked, her voice steady despite her evident relief. "He'll be in recovery for about an hour, then move to the cardiac care unit. You can visit him there, 2 at a time, for 15 minutes each hour." The resident checked her notes. "Dr. Levin will come speak with you after his next procedure to discuss the details and recovery plan." As the resident departed, the family embraced. First Patricia and her children, then Alexis, pulling Adrian into their circle with natural ease. "You're part of this too," she insisted, when Adrian hesitated. "You made this possible." The acknowledgement touched Adrienne deeply, though she tried to deflect it. "I just helped with the logistics. Your father's strength and Dr. Levin's skill did the real work." "Accept the gratitude, dear," Patricia said gently. "It becomes you." The simple wisdom in those words silenced Adrian's protests. Perhaps this was another lesson the Westbrooks could teach her, how to accept appreciation with grace, without diminishing its value through denial. They retreated to the hospital cafeteria to wait for the recovery period to end. Over surprisingly decent coffee and mediocre sandwiches, the conversation turned from immediate medical concerns to broader plans for the future. "I've been thinking about the business," Patricia said, addressing Liam directly. "Your father and I discussed it before the surgery. We think you're right about changing direction, focusing on custom work rather than competing with the big box stores." Liam nodded, clearly pleased that his parents had embraced the concept. "The location is still valuable, and Dad's craftsmanship is exceptional. There's a growing market for authentic, handcrafted pieces. The marketing would need to be completely different," Alexis chimed in, her business education evident in her analysis. "More emphasis on quality and heritage, less on convenience and price. A stronger online presence, too, to reach customers beyond just the local area." Die Twins? As the siblings discussed the business transformation, Adrienne found herself impressed by their complementary strengths: Liam's practical management experience, Alexis's fresh marketing perspective. Together, with their father's craftsmanship, they could potentially create something truly special. "You're very quiet," Patricia observed, turning to Adrian while the siblings continued their discussion. "What are you thinking?" Adrian smiled, caught in her observation. "I'm thinking that your children make a remarkable team. They balance each other beautifully." "They always have," Patricia agreed with maternal pride. "Even as children, Liam was always the planner, the protector. Alexis was the dreamer, seeing possibilities where others saw obstacles." She paused, studying Adrian with perceptive eyes. "He needs that balance in all his relationships, you know. Someone who challenges him to dream bigger, not just plan safer." The insight struck Adrian as profoundly accurate. In their short time together, she'd already seen how her willingness to take calculated risks complemented Liam's more cautious approach. Where he saw potential pitfalls, she saw opportunities. Where she might leap without looking, he ensured solid ground beneath their feet. "I've never been much of a dreamer," Adrian admitted. "I've always been more focused on concrete goals, measurable outcomes." "Perhaps," Patricia said with a knowing smile. "But you took a chance on my son when you had every reason to be cautious. That suggests there's more dreamer in you than you might admit." Before Adrian could respond, a nurse appeared to inform them that Mason had been moved to the cardiac care unit and could receive visitors. Patricia and Liam went first, leaving Adrian and Alexis to continue waiting. "Thank you," Alexis said after they'd gone, her voice quiet but intense. "Not just for the surgery, but for understanding. About all of it. The deception. The reasons behind it." "Your intentions were good," Adrian acknowledged. "Misguided in execution, perhaps, but the underlying motivation came from love." "That's a generous way of looking at it," Alexis said, looking down at her half-eaten sandwich. "We should have trusted you from the beginning." "Trust is earned, not assumed," Adrian replied, surprising herself with the insight. "And I hadn't yet earned yours, just as Liam hadn't fully earned mine. We were all still testing boundaries, defining our relationships." "And now?" Alexis asked, looking up. Adrian considered the question carefully. "Now we begin again, with honesty as our foundation. It's stronger that way, even if it's occasionally more uncomfortable." When it was their turn to visit Mason, Adrian initially tried to hang back, feeling it was a moment for family. But Mason himself beckoned her forward from his hospital bed, his voice weak, but his eyes clear and alert. "So, you're the woman who's captured my son's heart and saved my life," he said, without preamble. "Quite an accomplishment in just a few months." "Dad," Liam protested, but there was no real censure in his tone. "I'm just stating facts," Mason insisted. "I was raised to call things what they are." He fixed his gaze on Adrian. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate, but it's what I have to offer." "Your recovery is thanks enough," Adrian replied, genuinely moved by his directness, "and the opportunity to know your family better." Mason nodded approvingly. "Good answer." He shifted slightly, wincing with the effort before continuing. "Liam tells me you've been discussing ideas for the business. I'd like to hear your thoughts, if you're willing to share them." Despite his weakened state, Mason Westbrook's mind remained sharp, his questions incisive as Adrian outlined some possibilities for restructuring the family business. Their 15 minutes passed quickly, and soon the nurse was gently but firmly ushering them out to allow Mason to rest. In the hallway, Liam pulled Adrian aside while Patricia and Alexis headed back to the waiting area. "Thank you for that," he said quietly, "for treating him with respect, not pity, for seeing him as a businessman, not just a patient." "He reminds me of you," Adrian observed, "or rather, you remind me of him. That same directness, that unwillingness to sugarcoat difficult truths." Liam smiled at the comparison. "Highest compliment you could give me," he said. "He built everything we had from nothing. No college education, no family money, just determination and hard work. And love," Adrian added, seeing now the complete picture. "He did it all for love, of the work itself, And of your family. Yes, Liam agreed, his voice softening. Everything always comes back to that in the end, doesn't it? The question lingered between them, simple, yet profound in its implications. Before Adrienne could respond, her phone chimed with an incoming call. Penny, her business partner, with news about the Richmond deal that couldn't wait. She excused herself to take the call, stepping into a quiet corner of the hospital corridor. The next 3 days passed in a blur of hospital visits, business calls, and family meals at the modest hotel where they were staying. Mason's recovery progressed well, exceeding even Dr. Levin's optimistic projections. By the 4th day, he was sitting up in bed, color returning to his face, arguing good-naturedly with the nurses about when he could return home. On their final evening in Cleveland, with Mason stabilized and due to be discharged the following week, the family gathered in Patricia and Mason's small but immaculate home. The dining room table was set with the good china, reserved for Christmas, Easter, and life-saving heart surgeries, Patricia had explained with gentle humor. As they shared a meal that Patricia had somehow prepared despite spending most of the day at the hospital, Adrienne found herself studying the family photographs that lined the walls. Images of Liam and Alexis growing up, school pictures, sports teams, graduation ceremonies, a visual chronicle of the family history, displayed with evident pride. One photo in particular caught her attention. A much younger Liam, perhaps 16, standing protectively beside a small Alexis as they posed in front of the family hardware store. The sign behind them read, "Westbrook and Family, serving Cleveland since 1978. That was taken the day after Mason and I bought the store," Patricia explained, noticing Adrienne's interest. The children insisted on being included in the first official photograph. Liam declared himself part of the family portion of the business name even then. "He's always taken responsibility seriously," Adrienne observed, seeing in the teenage boy's posture the man he would become. "Too seriously sometimes," Patricia agreed. "He forgets that shoulders were designed to share burdens, not bear them alone." She gave Adrienne a meaningful look. "I'm glad he's found someone who reminds him of that." Sakani Tantita, after dinner, as Alexis helped her mother with the dishes, Liam invited Adrienne for a walk through the neighborhood. The evening was cold but clear, the earlier snow having stopped, leaving a light dusting on lawns and rooftops that sparkled under the streetlights. "This is where I grew up," Liam said as they walked, pointing out landmarks of his childhood. The park where he'd learned to ride a bike, the corner store where he'd bought penny candy, the high school where he'd played basketball but never quite made the starting lineup. It was a modest neighborhood, working class but well-maintained, with small houses set close together on tree-lined streets. So different from Adrienne's own upbringing in an affluent Boston suburb. Yet there was a warmth here, a sense of community that transcended material considerations. They stopped at a small playground, deserted in the evening chill. Liam brushed snow from a bench, and they sat together, watching their breath form clouds in the cold air. "You've been quiet today," he observed, echoing his mother's earlier comment. "Everything okay?" Adrienne nodded, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking about what your mother said, about shoulders being designed to share burdens." "Sounds like Mom," Liam agreed with a fond smile. "She has a way of cutting straight to the heart of things." "It made me realize something," Adrienne continued. "I've spent most of my life believing that independence was strength, that needing no one was the ultimate achievement. And now?" Liam prompted when she paused. "And now, I'm starting to understand that there's a different kind of strength in vulnerability, in allowing yourself to need others, and in being needed in return." She turned to face him fully. "What I felt when your father thanked me, when I saw how my help had made a tangible difference for your family, it was unlike anything I've experienced in my professional life, despite all my success there." Liam took her hand, his own warm despite the cold air. "That's what it means to be part of something larger than yourself," he said. "To be family." The word resonated differently now, filled with meaning beyond its dictionary definition. Family. Not just a biological connection, but a choice to belong, to commit, to show up, even when, especially when, things were difficult. I want that, Adrian admitted, the confession both frightening and freeing. With you, with them, I want to learn how to be part of a family. Liam's expression softened, his eyes reflecting the streetlight's glow. You already are, he said simply. You proved that the moment you set aside your hurt and suspicion to help my father. Family isn't about perfect understanding or never making mistakes. It's about what happens afterward, how you choose to move forward together. As if to emphasize his point, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I've been carrying this around for 3 days, waiting for the right moment, he explained, looking suddenly nervous. This isn't exactly how I planned it, sitting on a snowy bench in my old neighborhood, but somehow it feels right. Adrian's heart began to race as he opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the light. Not ostentatiously large or flashy, but elegantly designed, with a central diamond flanked by smaller sapphires that matched her eyes. I'm not proposing because of what you did for my family, Liam said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. I'm proposing because of who you are. Strong yet gentle, brilliant yet kind, cautious yet courageous when it matters most. He took the ring from its box, holding it between them like a promise. I love you, Adrian Gray, the real you, not just the successful businesswoman, but the woman who installs surveillance equipment when she's afraid of being hurt, who flies across the country to meet a family in crisis, who's learning to trust again despite past disappointments. Will you marry me? The question hung in the cold air between them, crystalline in its simplicity, yet profound in its implications. Adrian looked at the ring, then at Liam's face, open, honest, vulnerable in this moment of asking. She thought of the journey that had brought them here, from suspicion to understanding, from secrecy to truth, from independence to interconnection. Yes, she said, the single syllable containing multitudes. Yes, I will. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, as their lips met in a kiss that sealed the promise between them, Adrian felt a certainty unlike anything she'd known before. Not the certainty of control or prediction, but the certainty of choosing and being chosen, of building something together that neither could create alone. Later that evening, when they returned to the Westbrook home to share their news, the family's joy was immediate and encompassing. Patricia embraced Adrian with tears in her eyes, whispering, "Welcome home, daughter." Alexis squealed with delight, already talking about wedding plans and color schemes. And when they called Mason at the hospital to tell him, his gruff voice caught with emotion as he declared, "About time. Now I have something extra to recover for." That night, as they prepared for bed in the small guest room of the Westbrook home, Adrian stood by the window, watching the occasional car pass on the quiet street below. Her ring caught the moonlight, sending prisms dancing across the wall, a physical manifestation of the light that had entered her life, dispelling shadows of doubt and isolation she hadn't even fully recognized until now. Liam joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting gently on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice soft in the quiet room. "Hidden cameras," she replied with a small laugh, "and how sometimes the most important things can't be captured on film." He chuckled, the sound resonating through his chest against her back. "Like love," he suggested. "Or trust. Or family," she added, leaning back into his embrace. "I spent so long looking for betrayal that I almost missed seeing the gift that was right in front of me." "But you didn't miss it," he reminded her. "When it mattered most, you chose to see the truth, not just your fears." Or, the observation struck her as profound in its simplicity. Throughout her life, Adrienne had prided herself on seeing reality clearly, unobscured by emotion or wishful thinking. Yet in those days of suspicion, she had projected her past hurts onto present circumstances, nearly destroying something precious in the process. "I almost lost you," she acknowledged, turning in his arms to face him. "If I hadn't looked deeper, if I'd just assumed the worst." "But you did look deeper," Liam interrupted gently. "That's what matters." And he was right, she realized. The past couldn't be changed. The suspicions, the surveillance, the secrets kept on both sides. What mattered was the choice they'd made afterward. To understand, to forgive, to build something stronger from the broken pieces. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day, Adrienne Gray became Adrienne Westbrook in a simple ceremony in her Boston garden. Mason, fully recovered and working part-time in the newly rebranded Westbrook Custom Woodworking, walked her down the aisle. Patricia and Alexis stood as her attendants. The family connection now formalized, but in truth established months earlier in a Cleveland hospital waiting room. The business partnership had flourished as well. With Adrienne's capital investment and business acumen, Liam's management experience, Alexis's marketing innovations, and Mason's craftsmanship, Westbrook Custom Woodworking had quickly established itself as a premier source for bespoke furniture and architectural elements, with orders coming in from across the country. As Adrienne and Liam exchanged their vows beneath an arbor handcrafted by Mason for the occasion, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From suspicion to trust, from isolation to connection, from independence to interdependence. It hadn't been an easy path, nor a straight one. There had been detours of doubt, roadblocks of misunderstanding, moments when turning back seemed easier than pressing forward. But they had continued, together, one step at a time. And in doing so, they had discovered that the greatest journeys often begin with the smallest decisions. To look beyond appearances, to seek understanding rather than judgment, to offer forgiveness when it would be easier to hold on to hurt. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, as their assembled friends and family applauded, Adrienne felt the last piece of a puzzle click into place within her heart. The woman who had once installed surveillance cameras to catch her partner in betrayal now understood the deeper truth, that love isn't about perfect knowledge or complete certainty, but about choosing to see the best in another person, even when circumstances suggest the worst. In the end, what she had witnessed through that hidden camera wasn't betrayal at all, but devotion. A brother caring for his sister, a son supporting his parents, a man trying desperately to protect both his family of origin and the woman he loved. And in recognizing that truth, in choosing to act from compassion rather than fear, Adrienne had discovered her own capacity for devotion, for family, for love that transcended her carefully constructed boundaries. Sometimes, she reflected, as Liam led her back down the aisle as husband and wife, what seems like betrayal is simply love viewed from the wrong angle. And sometimes, the greatest revelations come not from what we discover about others, but from what we discover about ourselves in the process of seeking truth. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.